Hey, Corey, how are you?
Hey, Jamie, I'm all right.
Good morning. Yeah, it feels like in these strange times, even my sort of British default of I'm fine has been shaken slightly, but yeah, we're doing okay. We're hanging in there. So
We're southeast of England and we are okay. So that is a big thing.
yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for making the time to join this Sentientist conversation with me. In a way, they're a series of conversations about this very simple philosophical baseline, sentientism, which tries to answer the two deepest questions in philosophy: what's real and what matters. So they're really focusing on people's personal philosophical journeys. They've answered those two questions. But before we get on to your answers to those questions and your story, for people who don't know you, it would be great if you could give a quick introduction to your life and your focus.
I'm an American sociologist, and I currently am a lecturer of sociology with the University of Kent in Canterbury. And I specialize in vegan sociology, animals and society, vegan feminism. Where to start? Back in 2013, I founded the Vegan Feminist Network, which is basically an online platform for marginalized voices, young women in the movement, to have a place for their voices to be heard. At the time, there really wasn't any.
Yeah.
What else do I do? I've written a few books.
Yeah.
Probably most relevant for this podcast, my first book, A Rational Approach to Animal Rights, which tries to apply basic theories of science and methodology to more effective animal advocacy. I also recently published a book called Piecemeal Protest, Animal Rights in the Age of Nonprofits, because a lot of my work focuses on the impact of nonprofits and charities on social movements, specifically the animal rights movement. My most recent book comes out in July of 2021 on animal rights in Ireland. And currently I'm working on a book called Vegan Sociology, and also way down the line when I get a chance, vegan feminism. So I'm a big book author. I love that kind of stuff. A lot of articles as well. And I'm on the research board for the Vegan Society. I'm a co-founder of the International Association for Vegan Sociologists. And I was also, the other last thing is I was chair for the Animals and Society section of the American Sociological Association. So do a lot of sociological work for animals, basically. A lot of reading and admin stuff.
Yeah, it's an amazing range of work. And that's part of the reason I was so excited to talk to you, because many people are quite hesitant about linking the sort of epistemological side of philosophy and the moral side of philosophy. But you're one of the rare people who's done work that directly look at that intersection. So as you say, rational approach to animal ethics, you've done some interesting work on I guess the sort of atheist or skeptic and humanist movements and how those relate or don't relate to the field of animal ethics as well. Yeah, it's great to have the chance to talk to you. So to roll back from that work, and we'll come back to that in the later section, the first, those two philosophical questions that I like to ask is what's real? So for many people, that's a story about how they grew up and whether that was in a naturalistic or an atheistic environment or a religious or a supernaturally influenced environment, and how that side of their philosophy and their thinking has evolved, if it has, over time. So to the degree you're comfortable, talking us through that story, that would be fascinating to know.
It's a weird story, as in just not usual from where I'm from. I grew up atheist. I wasn't raised explicitly atheist. My mom didn't put a name on it. We just weren't raised with God. And I'm from the American South, where it's right in the Bible Belt. And I do remember it was just a sense of ignorance. I didn't know anything about it. And I would, go to school and my friends would talk about church and the different churches they went to. And to this day, I don't know the difference between what's a Baptist and a Methodist and all this. I still don't know what it all is. It's just foreign to me. My dad was religious. He sort of went to church a little bit after I grew up, and then we just were not a religious family. Yeah. It wasn't until I was much older that my mom just basically said, "Yeah, we're atheists." I was like, "Yeah, I know we're atheists, but you never said you were an atheist. Like, why did you say you were?" It was just like it was taken for granted. We don't believe in this. We don't follow it. So yeah, my mom is atheist. My brothers are atheists, and I'm an atheist. I've always been an atheist. I remember having that religious culture around me that all my family, of course, is super Southern and religious. And I remember the turning point for me is when I was 12 years old. It's actually quite interesting that this atheism is really bound to my veganism. But I remember when I was 12 years old, my cousin sent me a Bible in the mail and says, "I'm worried about your soul." Like, all right, okay.
You need to be saved.
I can only imagine like what she would have thought of us, like heathens. You're not going to church. So anyway, she gave me this Bible, and it was like it was made for kids, but it was still like very hard to read biblical stuff. I started from the beginning. I said, all right, I'm going to give it a go, because as a kid, you feel ostracized. Everyone else believes in this and they're into it. So what's it all about?
Yeah, maybe there's something in it.
I'll tell you what was in it. A lot of animal killing. And I remember after so many pages of just this bull was slaughtered, this sheep was slaughtered. I've had enough. This is not for me. This is, And I said, I tried. I read some of it. It's just, I'm sure there's lots more pleasant stuff later in the Bible, but I'm forcing it. I'm just forcing it here. And it's like upsetting to me to read this. It's not for me. Yeah. I'm doing just fine without it. But yeah, I was always atheist my whole life.
Yeah. And do you, as you say, you were growing up in a culture that was really infused with quite a strong sense of religiosity. Do you know how it came to be that your mother and your family weren't part of that? Or?
I don't know. I think my mom she's got 2 brothers and sisters. So she's one of 5 kids, and they grew up on a tobacco farm in Southern Virginia, very religious place. I don't know what it is. The rest of them are so religious, dedicated to it.
Yeah.
Big time volunteers with the church, and they read from the Bible on holidays and all this kind of stuff that's like really extreme. But my mom just never was. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the difference was with her.
And yeah, it's fascinating. I should have her on an interview maybe. But and it sounds like your engagement with religion and that religious culture, you looked into it, you read the Bible, but it wasn't like a traumatic thing for you. You didn't find it particularly difficult. But was it strange being like a fish out of water in that context at school or with family and friends? Or was it something you just put to one side and just dealt with and didn't take seriously?
I guess I just took it for granted. And a lot of my friends, religion wasn't really a big thing. They went to church maybe, but they didn't really talk too much about God. It didn't really come up in conversation really. And then by the time I got to university, a lot of people were atheists.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more atheists in higher education.
Yeah.
So yeah, by the time I got to university, I didn't even have to think about it anymore. There was that pressure when I was a kid. Like, I need to at least know the language of this, like to be able to talk to them. It was a little awkward, but it's just like wasn't for me, and it wasn't a big topic of conversation. I guess there's a level of secularization now that's happening in the South anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty common in that it's a backdrop for many people. But even for most religious people, for their day-to-day lives, the things they're getting on with, the things they're doing, it's not, present in every decision. Most of their decisions are, as you say, grounded in a pretty secular way of thinking already. But it was interesting that the thing that when you looked into it and you dug into it, the thing that pushed you back away from it, I guess, was the animal ethics angle. Because for some people, it's a journey of logic and reason and thinking about the facts and the evidence and going, this doesn't quite stack up. And for other people, it is more of that question of saying, hold on, the ethics that are being played out in these books and these stories just don't feel ethical to me. So it was interesting that it was actually the animal ethics side that was the sort of visceral, this doesn't feel right.
That is the thing that stood out to me. And I can't say that I ever really went into this like, all right, I'm going to believe it now. I just didn't believe it.
Yeah.
It was more of a matter of I need to educate myself to see what all the hoopla is about. And if I'm missing out on something.
Yeah. So it was a bit of both. It was, I don't believe it, and the ethics look pretty warped.
Yeah, that's the thing that stands out in my memory, is that was the reason I just shut that book and was done with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Fascinating. One of the reasons some people either are attracted to a religious worldview or are nervous about moving away from it is because, however poorly founded, it does give some grounding for ethics. There's a list of rules and there's some deity who's supposed to be perfectly good that you can judge you and punish you or reward you. And without a supernatural view, some people are nervous, what's my ethics going to be grounded on? And there's obviously the trope about atheists by definition are immoral and running around killing people because we have no religious ethics, which is trite and a little bit silly. But I think there is an interesting question there that if you don't have this supernatural objective grounding for ethics, what is there instead? So that's the second question that we like to talk through, is what matters morally. So how would you describe, what your ethics and your morality is grounded on, if it's grounded on something, given you don't have that supernatural standard?
I guess I can bring in a little sociological history here, because that was a big concern for, at the founding of the discipline, when we saw this major shift, particularly in the UK, where we used to have towns, villages that be centered, they would be surrounding the church would be the center, not just physically, culturally, the community would be based around that church. Then with industrialization, we moved away from that, obviously. We started having people move out of the villages into cities, start the factory type of life. The church started to have much less of a sway over people's day-to-day life. It didn't govern in the same way it did anymore.
Yeah.
And so we had a completely different type of society in the West. And so you have folks like Émile Durkheim, a French sociologist, who was looking at that, wondering, well, now that we have all these people moving out of these close connected villages centered around the church where religion dictated everything, now we have people moving into the cities and they're being more individual. What's going to bond this city together? Not even at the basics, like what's going to keep the city functioning? What's going to keep them all together just to make sure things get done?
Yeah.
But also, of course, he was interested in the morals and the ethics. He was wondering, if church is no longer dictating society, how are people going to be moral? There were also at the time, and he was a French sociologist. He was at a point in French history where there was a lot of political turmoil, obviously beginning with the French Revolution 100 years before he started writing, but there had been a lot of different regimes in France. And finally, as he was writing at the turn of the 20th century, we're starting to see this rise of democracy in France and this concept of the individual, as I mentioned, which is part of that industrial modern kind of life, but the concept of human rights, that the individual matters. It's no longer about you're just a cog in the great machine, you're a part of this ambiguous community. Now individuals and human rights matter. And he saw that, he actually called it a cult. It's using religious language because in a way it served to function as religion. Now we have this kind of reverence to individual rights, human rights, that there are certain things that are inalienable, right? Yeah, that's the history of sociology is very much so interested in that transition from a religiously led life to a more modern life where we have other types of things that hold us accountable that's not necessarily dictated from the church. And so this is why we haven't just spun out of some chaos after we became more secular. I guess I would be in line with that. I think that I'm a child of the Human Rights Project, and I think that it's about rights to have basic liberties, basic freedoms, freedom from suffering. It's all about equality and social justice.
Yeah. And one of the critical questions there is if that's a sort of principle about valuing the individual and their interests and their needs and granting them rights so that they can have autonomy and have a good life in a sense. One of the critical questions is how far do you extend that circle or that considerability of who warrants those rights? So there are groups of people who would agree with that principle, but they'll have a restrictive circle of compassion or moral consideration or granting of rights that will even exclude many humans. And that leads to many of the problems we continue to struggle with today around human discrimination in its various forms. So there's a journey and an evolution that people have to go through even within the human species about, okay, these people count, therefore they warrant rights. But there's also a critical point for many people about when do they recognize that, hold on, it's not just humans. So it'd be interesting to know your story, and you've hinted at it already, about how did some people don't like the term moral circle because it has certain implications, but how did your moral circle or your scope of moral considerability shift, again, even from childhood? And at what point did you start to think beyond humans and take non-human animal ethics seriously, and how did that play out?
I've always taken animal ethics seriously. I can remember, this is Mishka's death. Mishka's death intersects.
So she can't hear me.
Two different color eyes. I adopted her from Bulgaria this summer.
She's gorgeous.
This is all day with this. So yeah, my first protest was actually a dog protest when I was about 8 years old. We went to visit a family friend, and I grew up in Appalachia and in the South, and it's just typical for people to get dogs, and why they get dogs, I don't know, but then put them on chains and leave them outside.
Yeah.
So they bark a lot because wouldn't anyone if they're on the chain all day? So we visited this guy's house, and he said they were barking because we were coming up the lane, and he said, I'm going to take them to the shelter tomorrow and get rid of them. Just an offhand comment, but my little 8-year-old ears heard that and said, even at that age, I knew what it meant to go to the shelter. You're not coming out, especially in that shelter where I grew up, that they don't get adopted. There's actually sometimes there was one, I don't know if it was that particular shelter, but one nearby, they got in trouble because they were just taking the dogs after they were being dropped off and shooting them with a shotgun in the back. Just high euthanasia rates. Anyway, so I knew even at 8 years old that this was bad. So when we came home, I did the protest, and as the way any 8-year-old would, crawled under my bed and would not come out. And I was under that bed all day long until...
You were an activist even then.
Yeah, so they got him on the phone. He says, I'm not taking him to the shelter. I just said that. I don't mean it. So hopefully he meant it. But yeah, it was there at a very young age. And in fact, I should have remembered to keep it out. My mom sent me for Christmas a bunch of drawings from when I was a kid. And there's a drawing I can't be much older than 8. And it's a drawing of all these people at the table. And there's a turkey at the table. And it says, I'm thankful that no one's eating me. So like even at that young age, and I'm talking like this is in the late 80s or early 90s, we didn't, it's surprising I would even got that message. So it started early for me, and I don't know what it was. We always had pet dogs and cats. My mom is not a vegetarian, not a vegan, but she's very compassionate when it comes to other animals. I also had birds and hamsters and mice, all kinds of different, I hate the word pets, but
yeah.
And then she would say little comments like, I don't think it's right to have those parakeets or budgies. It's not right to keep birds in a cage. Like those comments that stick with you. Of course, I took it to a whole nother level. So I don't know. I grew up in a mountain town in Appalachia where everybody eats meat, and the schools would basically shut down during hunting season. You drive down the streets during hunting season and see deer hanging in people's yards, bleeding out, all kinds of gruesome stuff. It's just part of the culture, and yet here I am, like the lone Appalachian vegan.
Yeah. And how did you navigate one of the central challenges is the food side of this story, because many people feel that visceral, intuitive compassion for non-humans, but still continue to, consume them on the plates. And again, that's a really difficult cultural and family and social thing to work through as well. Was that something you managed to do quite early, or was that difficult?
I managed it. It wasn't. So at the moment I went vegetarian, I was 13. I was watching a cooking program with my mom. The guy went to a butcher's shop in the program. There's pigs' heads hanging from chains, and that was the moment. Like many people, when they switch to vegetarianism or veganism, they say, "Oh, that was an actual animal." And I said, "I'm not eating animals anymore." And my mom said, "We'll see." Here we are. I was 13 then. I'm 37 now.
Yeah.
And this was the early 90s or mid 90s, and we didn't have internet. The internet wasn't widely had back then. And so I wrote to different animal charities like PETA.
Yeah.
They sent me stuff in the mail. And then I quickly learned about veganism and realized if I care about animals, then I can't be wearing leather, I can't be drinking milk and all this sort of thing. But I also realized I'm living under my parents' roof, and I have certain limitations. It was already a big deal to make them have special vegetarian meals for me. They would, I still remember, they would get these $1 frozen fettuccine Alfredo things. I just like ate that every day, basically. But if I were to say, now I'm going to be vegan, it just wasn't. My mother was preparing my meals and my parents were buying the groceries. I didn't have any autonomy or agency, but I said to myself, the day I go to university is the day I will go vegan. And that was absolutely what I did. So when I was in university, the very first day in the middle of August, 2001, I was 17 and I went vegan, and that was it.
Yeah.
The day I went to college.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of challenges to this sort of sentiocentric scope of moral consideration. So some people say you've gone too far, right? Only humans matter, or sometimes even only subsets of humans matter, or sometimes only subsets of sentient beings matter. We should care about companion animals and charismatic wild animals, but not wild animals and not farmed animals. And I guess it's fair to assume that you don't carve any of those chunks out, and that you'd grant moral consideration to all of those types of sentient being. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. And I would say I go a bit further than a lot of other people that I've had debates with other vegan friends on honey. I'm sorry if you eat honey, I don't think you're vegan. And I think that a lot of that is they just aren't, they say, okay, insects aren't really sentient, but they are just falling behind that block and that bias. And if you actually learn a little bit more about them, I think that's part of it. They don't want to learn more because they just don't want to know. Just like any person before they go vegan. I don't want to know.
Yeah, they've gone so far, but then there's another block. Yeah.
And for me, with honey, honey isn't really in everything. It's easy to skip, and we have a million different things you can have instead of that. So I don't know why. I think it's like kind of this nostalgia and honey is like this natural product, and you just don't want to give it up. And it's so greenwashed by natural foods movements. And anyway. Yeah. But the other thing is with shellfish as well, like clams and stuff. I've been in debates with people about that. And just go and look at a diagram of what their insides look like. They have organs like us. So I'm just going to err on the side of caution there that they probably have some level of sentience. And it's again, like how central are clams and oysters to your day-to-day life?
To your world, yeah.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm similar. I'd take it, give them the benefit of the doubt approach. But one area, you touched on this sort of naturalistic fallacy type idea that if something's natural, it must be good, it must be normal. But that's one other really challenging area, even amongst the vegan and animal advocacy communities, is around thinking about wild animal ethics too. So in simple terms, I think that the suffering of wild animals is morally salient as well. I think, it's a morally negative thing. That doesn't mean the answers are easy. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be really prudent about intervening. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be really cautious about what we do in the wild. It doesn't mean that the answers are even possible. But to my mind, excluding wild animals from our moral consideration, again, to me is a mistake, because they're sentient just as a mishka or a pig or a chicken or a cow is as well. So I don't know what your perspectives are on the challenge of wild animal suffering.
I'll tell you, I was listening earlier this morning. The Guardian had a podcast up on rewilding, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm into this. This is great. Listening along. And the guy on the show was talking about wanting to reintroduce wolves into Scotland and the Highlands where there's not many people, and then kind of the benefits that having a keystone species would have for the greater ecosystem, And then he's in the interview, this is when I turned it off. I can't listen to this nonsense. But he says, I went up there to visit, and all these deer that are there, now there's no wolves to hunt them, so they just overpopulate, and then we just have to kill them, and it's the most human thing to do. And then he was talking, it was like the Omnivore Dilemma guy. Who writes that book? Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
I just had to kill the deer to write the book. He did the same thing in this podcast. It's like, I had to shoot one of these deers to put my ethics where my mouth is, and like, oh, please, turned it off. But he was making this played out old argument that if we don't have natural predators in the system, then we have to be that predator, and we have to cull these animals, otherwise they'll starve and they have horrible deaths. And I call bullshit on that. I'm sorry. I used to work for the National Forest Service, and I know very well that we intentionally created ecosystems or habitats for these animals to proliferate.
Yeah.
So the hunters, it's a multi-million-dollar industry in the United States, and here it's also
absolutely
hunting still happens here. We actually create conditions for these animals, and then we create narratives that kind of alleviate any kind of moral dilemma we may feel about shooting these animals. Oh, it's for the greater good, so they don't suffer. It's like, oh, for Pete's sake. And I also call bullshit on that as well, because we have mass hunger in the world. Mass hunger in the world, even in the UK. Kids who don't have enough to eat. Well, should we just let them linger and suffer, or should we shoot them, or should we create policy changes where we redistribute our resources so that no one goes hungry?
Yeah.
So there's always life affirmative ways. And I think when it comes to wildlife, and it's a bit of life is like otherizing language.
Yeah.
A lot of times our ethics just take a U-turn when it comes to free living animals, as though they don't feel and they don't have rights and they don't have a capacity to suffer like any other animal. Why are we so stuck inside this box of this naturalistic thinking of it's either life or death, we must shoot them or they will suffer?
Yeah. Why
can't we intervene in a more life-affirming way and provide care to them as free living neighbors, as community members?
Yeah. We have this amazing capacity to invent categories that we apply to things to justify doing what we wanted to do anyway. And I think, the deer overpopulation is a classic example where, the story as well, the overpopulation is damaging the ecosystem and the environment, and we need to manage it in some way. And if we allow people to hunt, then it helps the local economy, and it's something we needed to do anyway. So in a way, it's actually ethical. And I never really wanted to get into this, but sometimes the Twitter conversations can lead you to strange pieces of research. But I looked up the PDF that the government produces in Scotland for deer farming. And in there, it's explicitly talking about how to force breed deer to maximize the population. Because, and you're like, hold on, these are the people who are marketing by saying there's an overpopulation problem, who are actually breeding more of the deer because they want to get paid to be able to shoot them. And it's, I'm just, this is bizarre. Absolutely bizarre.
Meanwhile, how many people and other animals are killed by bullets and arrows that go astray? How many people are killed by cars? With collisions with animals and cars?
Yeah.
So in the United States, I don't know the data here. It's why I keep referring back to the U.S. But in the U.S., lots of people are injured, seriously injured and killed every year with collisions from deer, as we're actively making sure more of them are alive so we can go out and hunt them. And there's so many incidents of domesticated animals, children, walkers, people on their property who've been shot, who have been maimed, people just walking through the forest. I would be afraid to walk through the forest because I might be shot.
Yeah. And I think this is part of one of the strange things about many different fields is that once you put some type of sentient being in a different category that gives you the excuse of excluding them from your consideration, the default answer to almost any problem is kill them all.
Yeah.
And whether it's overpopulation or whether it's different fields, it's bizarre. Whereas as soon as you switch that philosophy and say it doesn't matter what category we've applied, that sentient individual, its experience, its interests, its needs, and warrant rights, that's what matters. It doesn't magically give you an answer, right? Because there may well still be situations where we have to take really difficult decisions, or where interests conflict, and where we might need to do, cause harm or even death. But at least taking that sentiocentric view, where you recognize the moral salience of each of the individual beings, gives you the motivation to think about some other solution, whether it's fencing or it's immunocontraception, or there may well be other ways of looking for it, but you won't look for those other ways if you've already excluded those beings from moral consideration. And there's another challenge to this sort of sentientist way of thinking, which is actually that it doesn't go far enough, and that plays into the same agenda. So some people will say, look, in a way, sentient, and in fact, the first use of the term sentientism was, I think, by a chap called John Rodman, who was criticizing it and saying sentientism is just another form of discrimination because you're discriminating against non-sentient beings or non-sentient entities. So he was putting forward a biocentrism or an ecocentrism that says we shouldn't just have intrinsic direct moral consideration for sentient beings that can suffer. We should have direct moral consideration for plants and ecosystems and species in the environment and rocks and rivers and trees and so on. I'd be interested in your view on that. And personally, I'm reasonably open-minded about people taking their moral consideration beyond sentience if they want to, as long as that doesn't justify excluding some of the sentient beings. And it does feel to me like this isn't true of all conservationists, all environmentalists, but the center of gravity of the environmental movement at the moment seems to have said, right, we're concerned about humans, good. Because of the threat of climate change and environmental destruction to humans, we are now going to radically extend our moral consideration to really be concerned about plants and the environment and ecosystems and habitats and species. But at the same time, we're still going to carve out moral consideration for all farmed animals and all non-charismatic wildlife. And I find that bizarre. And it feeds back into the agenda we were just discussing, because in a sense, people are more concerned about the ecosystem that the overpopulated deer are damaging than they are about the sentient deer themselves. And I'm not saying that's a simple trade-off, but so I'm interested in your thoughts about ecocentrism or biocentrism, or these views that take things even further than...
I think you know. The first time I was really exposed to this, it just wanted to tear my hair out. I was a PhD student and I took some environmental philosophy classes. And it was like, are we serious right now? I teach an environmental politics class, and I have a whole module on this debate. Are animal rights relevant to environmental politics? And I had the students read some sparring authors on that. I think for me, obviously, ecosystems matter. That's just taken for granted if you care about non-human animals. It's just, in the parallel of being human rights. Well, we want human rights. We want to fight inequality. Who cares where you live in a slum when you don't have clean water? And obviously, like your house and your home, your habitat matters, whether you're human or non-human. So if we extend our compassion and our moral ethics to other animals, then obviously we're going to have to care about places where most of them live, which is out in these spaces.
Yeah, and I share that view entirely, because I think actually there's a lot of overlap, because I think most people who take a sentientist or a sentiocentric approach have a deeply care about the environments and ecosystems, and of course they do, right? Because they are so intrinsically linked with the welfare and the perspective and the experience of all the sentient beings. But that's why they're important. They're not independent in their own. So the reason we don't care about a rock in a valley on a distant planet that will never be experienced by anything is because it's morally irrelevant. It cannot experience anything. So it's, in technical terms, they have instrumental importance because they're relevant to sentient beings, but they're not intrinsically important in their own. So I think we'll agree on that. And in fact, there is still a lot of common ground, because I think both a sentientist and an ecocentrist would both really want to take a robust and strong approach to protecting the environment and to countering the climate crisis and so on and so forth. But the difference would be a sentientist would want to do that in a way that also has deep compassion for individual sentient beings at its heart, whereas sometimes an ecocentrist will quite happily roll over the interests of many millions or billions or trillions of sentient beings in the interest of some sort of what really is just a reflection of an anthropocentric vision of a nice, pretty environment that I enjoy watching and I want to see on my nature programs. And so it's really just another reflection of anthropocentrism rather than it is genuinely breaking away from a human perspective. But
absolutely. I think a great example of that, in fact, I would say you're using some great philosophical terminology there. Instrumental value of certain parts of the ecosystem. I feel like that non-human animals are treated that way as instruments to this grand plan that these people have. And also, it's not just anthropocentric, it's often quite patriarchal. This concept, I can control the landscape and I can almost act like I'm God and I'll create blah. But I think a good example of this is down here in Southeast England. I live next to the Blean National Forest, and they've got this new program where they're going to introduce bison. It's already been approved, and it's like, ooh, everybody's asking me, have you heard about this? It's like, yeah, I've heard about it, and I don't have a popular opinion about it. Because immediately what I think about, these are the charismatic megafauna, so that's all we care about. But also, these are science experiments. They're research subjects.
Yeah.
So if you look at the kind of program language, they say, oh, we're going to put viewing booths up so people can come and look and gaze at these animals. That classic human gaze, animals in the wild are just there for us to be entertained, like you said, like watching it on television. But the other thing is, like, what if they get out of control? What do you think is going to happen? It says, if we have to, we'll call them. And I think that there'll come a day when they're like, we have to call them, because I feel like there's almost a bloodlust when it comes to, you mentioned this earlier, where we could have this litany of other solutions to conflicts of interest, but it seems like the go-to is always, let's kill them. So I'm thinking that these poor bison are going to be shipped in from Europe, and that's going to be a really terrible experience. They're going to be put into these places where people are going to come, probably in droves, especially in lockdown COVID situations where there's nothing else to do. And they're going to be constantly monitored. If they dare do anything that's too wild, then they'll be shot. Yeah,
you can almost see it playing out, can't you?
Yeah. That's what happened in the U.S. when they introduced wolves.
Yeah. And again, it's really all about the human interest. It's not about centering the interests of the non-human sentience. Yeah. One other area I'd love to come back to on this sort of moral foundations question is, for me, the sort of perspective you've outlined, which is really centered around the either granting rights to the individual sentient being or certainly acknowledging their interests and their needs, is, for me, that is the moral foundation. That's what grounds the perspective. And you can build loads of other things on that, but at its foundation, it's that needlessly causing suffering to any sentient entity is a moral negative, and enhancing the flourishing of any of those sentient entities is a positive. So for me, that helps me find a middle ground between the sort of moral objectivism of a supernatural perspective, but it also avoids the dangers of a sort of morally relativistic approach, which almost says there is no objective moral grounding. It's just something we negotiate, and who are we to judge if a different group judges something differently? And a lot of your work has been centered in ideas of intersectionality and recognizing the complex patterns of identity and group relationships and how those can relate to the experience of individuals as well. And I see enormous power in that perspective. But for some, it seems to lead them down a path that ends towards moral relativism. What's your view about how we can take the value of that intersectional approach while still keeping some moral grounding that doesn't end up excusing some forms of oppression?
That is a very tricky situation. I'm really glad you highlighted that, because that's a major criticism of ecofeminism, and a lot of my work that focuses on this stuff. People push back. Well, anything, you're just letting anything happen, then, aren't you? Especially because I come from a very hard-line animal rights background.
Absolutely.
If you let anything happen to animals, or you allow any of that, then here's how I would negotiate it. I would say it's not about saying that violence against animals anywhere in any condition is acceptable. Just because it's a certain group doing it, that doesn't mean that it's okay that they're doing it. I would take the unpopular opinion that what happens to non-human animals in indigenous spaces, like just because they're indigenous, we shouldn't romanticize them. Oh, they're the perfect people. And they're people too. And they have to negotiate their morals and their ethics. But the issue here is that we have to be mindful of larger power processes, such as colonialism. When we're talking about indigenous people, or we're talking about what's happening in China. I have a student right now who's doing research on that, about people's attitudes in the UK about people's treatment of other animals in China, which doesn't have the best animal rights record. They don't have any animal rights legislation, as far as I'm aware. But the point is not to say, okay, China, you've experienced colonialism, so do whatever you want. And then indigenous people of the world, you've been really done wrong, so just do whatever you want. That's not what we're saying. We're saying is that if you want to extend your animal rights agenda to places that have experienced extreme social oppression, colonialism, slavery, whatever it may be, you need to be mindful of that, so that you're not just coming in with another list of things that you expect them to do and then set up shop and start dominating them in a kind of a happy way, but still it's a form of domination. An example I like to give, and I can't remember the exact name of this organization. I talk about it in my book, but there's a group that has set up shop in Asia. And if you look at the CEO, the staff, the board of directors, whatever you want to call them, most of them are white, and most of them are based in Europe or North America. But they've set up shop in Asia, and then they start campaigning about telling them what to do with other animals, specifically targeting dog and cat use. And if you start looking through their kind of materials, it's like, why are you focusing on dogs and cats when, other animals are being killed? The U.S., where a lot of these people are coming from, and Europe, where a lot of them are coming from, lots of animals are being killed there. Why aren't you focusing on animals being killed there? And they say something like, dogs and cats are unique in the amount that they suffer in slaughterhouses. Well, that's bullshit. That's not true. This is about you being Western and you not liking how non-Western people treat animals, when in the West, things are just as crappy. It's just a different, situation.
And it's difficult because the oppression they're resisting does need to be resisted because it is wrong. But as you say, you can look at the frame that they're taking and ask what's it really motivated by, and how are those different motivations playing into that choice of focus? I
don't think that I wouldn't say that these people who run this organization, it's a big organization, by the way, I wouldn't say that they're racist. I wouldn't say that their secret agenda is that they want to get Chinese people or whatever. I think that it's...
And I think they do have a genuine compassion for those dogs and cats, right?
Yeah, they just need to stay in their lane. And I think when activists ask me then, well, what do I do? I don't just want to let this suffering happen.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is to support the communities that are resisting themselves. So a very good example of this is with the UPC, the United Poultry Concerns, which is a Virginia-based, really a chicken advocacy group that Karen Davis runs. Karen Davis herself is of Jewish ancestry, so this adds another level of, okay, it's a little bit your place to go in here. But she has a big campaign against is it Koporos, where they swing the chickens for a Jewish holiday. and the chicken absorbs the sin, and they just basically leave these chickens to die, and it's really gruesome and horrible. Now, if any old non-Jewish organization, say PETA or the Humane Society of the United States, were to intervene and say, all right, you Orthodox Jews, you better stop doing this Jewish tradition that's so cruel and unusually awful. That gets to the point of a single issue campaign. Why are you singling out this particular issue when all these things are problematic? Yeah. But especially when you're attacking an ethnic group or a colonized group, an indigenous group, you're running into trouble there. So it's not about these outsiders. What about supporting local groups, people who are members of that community who also take issue with this? It's not just smart, developed, Western, non-Jewish, native people versus indigenous people who are stupid or whatever. They also have ethics and convictions. So the best thing to do then is to support those communities so that they can more effectively and non-offensively and in a non-dominating way address issues. So in the indigenous community as well, there's vegetarian and vegan advocates, animal rights advocates. So if you're interested in supporting those campaigns, support those activists rather than setting up some separate organization or campaign and not thinking about those power differentials, which can actually inhibit your campaign in a way you might not have considered.
And I think that's a really interesting perspective, because you can still condemn the oppression that's going on there. You can see that the best way of addressing that is to support the people engaged in that community or that culture as they resist that form of oppression. But what you don't do is you don't pile in from outside and impose, but partly because that's probably not the most effective way of actually helping the oppressed at the root of the problem. But what you also don't do is you also don't excuse the oppression because it's of a different culture either. And we will see this in human ethics as well. So there are some people who, for genuinely, positive motivations, because we know the history of colonialism, we know the history of, imposing values on other cultures, because they're so nervous about that, they will look at practices of oppressing non-believers or homosexual people or women in other cultures and will be very hesitant about criticizing it because they'll say, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
So I think that's when it goes too far, is when that sort of motivated hesitation and respect for other cultures actually leads us to abandon the oppressed within those cultures, whether they're human or non-human, and say, who am I to judge from outside? And whereas I think the approach you've framed is different from that. You're saying we recognize the oppression, we recognize the problem, but the best way of engaging to help is by supporting those involved in that community and in that culture who are already resisting.
Yeah, be an ally. Yeah. I think a great parallel that you were just hinting around is female genital mutilation. In the UK, there's this documentary that the BBC did. It was just like, because I used to, when I taught gender, would teach quite a lot about that, and students would just be like, what? They just weren't, when I was in the US, they weren't familiar with it.
Yeah.
I think in the UK, because the immigrant population, people are a little bit more familiar, and it actually happens in the UK in some places.
Yeah.
But anyway, in this documentary, there was two activists who were teaching people in the public, people who were walking by, asking them for their support against this. And a lot, like you just said, were like, not in this day and age, teach their own, and who am I to be part of that British imperialism? And then at the end of the day, they were like, hardly anybody actually wants to support this, and this is an awful thing that's happening to little girls, millions of little girls. We should actually intervene. So they were actually supporting that point that, yes, we have to be mindful of those power differentials, and we don't want to recolonize or reoppress or double it down. But we do have to take a stand. But what is a way to do it? They also were suggesting in that documentary, supporting people who are doing it, supporting people who are already in the community, who are of that community, not washing your hands of it.
Yeah, I agree. And quite often the worst oppressed sentient beings, including humans, are actually those who are within another group or community that in another context is also oppressed. But because of that wider oppression, their oppression is excused or hidden. And I think that's a deep shame. And I think returning to that, and I've had some conversations who take a very strongly relational approach to their ethics, who will criticize sentientism and say you're picking a characteristic And what's more important is our sort of network of social relations in our negotiations. And I say, absolutely, I totally agree. The network of social relationships we have as humans and non-humans are deeply important to the quality of our experience, to the way we suffer, the way we flourish. And that's all richly important. But there's a danger if in the relational approach, if it's taken independently from the value of a sentient being, that relational approaches are largely defined by definition by the powerful entities that are able to be part of the conversation that negotiates the moral system that is then imposed. And when you have, groups of humans or groups of non-humans that aren't able to participate in the conversation, there's a danger that there's a positive motivation behind the relational approach that says, we want to resist oppression, so let's take a relational approach. But actually, it can end up excusing oppression because a relational approach can end up with powerful groups imposing categories on others. Whereas I think a sentientist approach that says we recognize all the value and power of all those relations, and that's really important. And in reality, all of our morality, of course, is negotiated when we think about laws and regulations. But if you have a baseline that says every single sentient being matters morally, that at least provides a buttress and a defense against oppression, because whatever is relationally negotiated cannot needlessly justify causing harm or death to sentient beings. So it's almost like a backstop or a defense against any form of oppression. I think, I certainly find helpful as we're negotiating some of these really tricky situations.
When you're saying relational, give me an example of that. Is this like is feminist kind of relation of care, or are you talking about something else?
Well, I guess I've experienced it in fields of, and again, I'm an amateur here, not an academic, so I may be miscasting this, but I've seen it in fields of AI ethics and feminism and cultural comparisons as well, but also in the field of morality, where some people will say there is no objective grounding of morality, whereas I'd say my morality is grounded in the suffering and the flourishing of sentient beings. That's a grounding, and it's a naturalistic one because of my imperfect understanding of what it means to be a sentient being and what sentience is and what it feels like to suffer and flourish. So I'd say that's my grounding. A purely relational approach would say that doesn't matter. What matters is the moral values that we manage to negotiate between ourselves. There is no objective grounding at all. It's purely what we come to negotiate as a society. Those are the values. So it is back to that sort of relativistic.
Yeah, that could be dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it feels quite prevalent in some fields at the moment. And as you say, it leads to that hesitation about condemning FGM or condemning certain animal practices or condemning throwing gay people off roofs and I have even there's one reasonably well-known polemicist in the UK who's actually he's a priest. And I had quite a protracted Twitter conversation with him where he takes this view of saying, who are we to judge? And he was unable to bring himself to condemn the stoning to death of homosexual people in other cultures because it's their culture. And I don't know. I'm not sure how prevalent it is, but again, it's that sort of relativistic, relational thinking that says there is no moral grounding. There is no objective standard. It is literally just what we negotiate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we probably share a perspective on that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the buttress against that and the defense against that is to take the perspective of the individual that's being oppressed or the individual that's suffering.
I take that to a certain point. Like, I know every once in a while there will be some campaign floating around. Oh my gosh, look at these Asian people eating an octopus alive. And I'm like, yeah, that's awful. But hey, cut back to, say, the UK. Look what's happening in this restaurant or this slaughterhouse or whatever. Like, to that extent, like, I can
agree.
Be a little bit more relevant, but at the end of the day, I think it's all wrong. And I think one thing we haven't really discussed is another way to get around this moral relativism slippery slope issue is I'm critical of single issue campaigns in general, which can easily fall us into that trap. Why focus on how Asian people are eating dogs and cats, or why focus on live export, or why focus on hunting or whatever else? Yeah, I can understand certain issues will stir enough emotion that it will motivate people. And to an extent, you do need one single kind of thing for people to focus on in order to mobilize effectively. However, I'm arguing that what if our single issue campaign was just veganism? And veganism is not just what we eat, but this kind of political position, a moral compass, if you will, that encapsulates everything. So we don't have to be, we can actually hone in all of our resources and our interests and our motivation and our energy into advocating veganism instead of, all right, today, here we go. We're going to be against the alpaca wool industry. All right, tomorrow is going to be the ducks they're trying to kill in Colorado. It's never ending, and it's always going to lead us up to, why do you care about this and not that? And why are you picking on this group and not that group? And we can easily abscond that if we just, or avoid that if we move into just promoting veganism. Of course, veganism is not perfect. You get also the pushback on, well, veganism isn't approachable for everyone. It's not affordable to everyone. I think there's ways we can deal with those kind of counterclaims, but I think veganism is probably the best way to avoid a lot of that single issue, moral relativism kind of stuff that we run into.
Yeah, and that's really the final topic that I was keen to cover with you today, and we've touched on much of it already. And if you're okay for a little bit more time, but it's just to think about the future. So we're in this weird situation where I think you and I share a naturalistic worldview, and we share this sort of sentiocentric worldview that, you know, all suffering beings matter morally. And I think to you and me, they almost seem somewhat self-evident and tautological and really strongly grounded, almost to the degree that I find it, I know people disagree, but I find it difficult to understand how people couldn't agree with us. But at the same time, most of the 8 billion people on the planet don't, right? They either have some form of supernatural view that can warp their ethics, or they have a different moral circle that excludes certain classes of sentient being from moral consideration completely. So in that somewhat strange situation where the moral argument and the epistemological argument seems pretty strong, but most people on the planet still disagree with us, how do you think about the future and how we can best move towards a better future where there's less suffering and more flourishing? And you've touched already on single issue versus broader, what's the right campaign, and a lot of your work has focused on taking a rational approach to thinking about the best ways of advocacy. And you can think super sci-fi future, or you can think immediate and medium term. How do you think about the future and the best ways of getting towards a better one?
Okay, I will start off with that my bit on rational advocacy, and then I want to move on and talk a little bit about sociological prospects for social change. Yeah. I have this kind of argument with our advocacy. Do we have any research to back it up? When I wrote that book, A Rational Approach, we didn't. We had the Humane Research Council, which is now Faunalytics, which had been around, I think, they're coming up on 20 years now, but they were a lesser known nonprofit. Most, if not all, of the major charities didn't do one iota of research to see, are these campaigns even working? Yeah. Now with Peter Singer's effective altruism, there's been a groundswell in a lot of organizations now to do some kind of research to see if their campaigns are effective or not. I think the Humane League does. Who else does it? There's a few that kind of dabble in it, but before, when I was writing that book, nobody bothered. No one cared. Everyone relied on it, on a sort of religious kind of devotion to campaigns that had just been around for a long time, and they had these like mantras that they would repeat. It really was like a religious sort of experiences. So if you go to a conference and say, okay, we're all together, an animal rights conference, everyone's together for the first time, people just like us. And I just listen in and I can hear people just repeating catchphrases and repeating these mantras of, this is what's best for animals and this is the best way to do it. And then just things that you've seen like on repeat in newsletters and chat forums and wherever else. And so people just being indoctrinated with these belief systems. And no one has actually been, is there fact to base this up, or are you just believing it because that's what you've been socialized by the movement to believe? And in my second book, I actually explore that in more detail, where I look at the rise of nonprofits and how they do, in fact, groom the movement. A lot of this also emerged when I was a student activist. When I was at Virginia Tech, I was the president of the animal rights group there. But before that, I was below the president. And the guy was like repeating all the same mantras that you just read that off the PETA website, man. Yeah. And at the time, I was really getting influenced by like critical abolitionist thought and this idea that maybe just making cages bigger is not really what I'm in animal rights for. I'm actually for people to think about animals as non-products and non-objects, but as persons and individuals. And so when I would bring that to the table, I would just be like hit with this wall of, but it's better to make the eggs more humane or whatever. I remember the big split was they wanted to do a campaign with our university cafeteria to make them switch to cage-free eggs. And I was like, what the hell are we doing with an animal rights group? I don't give two shits if it's cage-free. I don't want any eggs. Why don't we promote more vegan options? The world's not going to go vegan overnight, so we the same old scripts that they were just programmed with. And I'm like, where is this coming from? Mind you, we also have Compassion Over Killing. Erica Meyer, who now they're Animal Outlook or whatever, she came and gave a talk to us. We had people from Vegan Outreach come and give a talk to us. And then I'm like, wait a minute. All the big people from these leading organizations are coming to these student groups, and oftentimes the student groups are paying for them to come. And they're just being indoctrinated because these groups know, and if you look at the materials that they produce, they intentionally look out for student groups because this is where radicalism would originate. So we've got to squash that out. But we also need to groom them for the next generation of people who are going to do our bidding, basically. They're the preachers of the animal rights world. They come in, and the young people who are really vulnerable to these messages, who care about animals and they want to do something, and you have Animal Outlook's president telling them, go tell Morningstar to switch to cage-free eggs or something like that. And then these young people adopt these messages. Now we have online with social media. When I was a younger advocate, social media wasn't a thing. Now it is. And so you're seeing them encroaching the spaces and grooming people. And it becomes like people just have faith in these campaigns. They have faith in these mantras, and they don't actually have any evidence to back up. Does it actually work? How do you know? Tell me, what's the research that shows that us pouring all of our resources into creating bigger cages is going to liberate animals? Where'd you get that from? Who told you that? Unpack that for me, please. And they don't have any evidence to back it up. I think one time a few years ago, Farm Sanctuary or one of those organizations found one obscure article in some like Kansas farming journal that said, oh, people pushing for bigger cages is making it more expensive, and so we're going to quit producing as much meat or something. But I checked up on it. It's like, wow, that is an obscure and one journal article. It's like not convincing, man. So now what they've started to do is, so when I first wrote that book and I was doing my advocacy and I was like coming up against that, and I was like, wow, there's no evidence to support that. Now the culture has changed, and with more and more of these nonprofits, they've professionalized, they rely on grants, they rely on funding, and in the background, Peter Singer, effective altruism. Now this culture is created. We need to have something to show that we are effective, we are efficient, and we are better than all these other organizations. So they start to create their own research. On one hand, I'm like, great. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you didn't care at all if you had any science to back up what you're dumping all our donations into. At least now you're attempting to see if it works or not.
They're trying to respond to your challenge.
Yeah, great. But I have a problem when it's the people who are running the organization who are conducting that research, and a lot of them have no scientific training at all. And when animal charity evaluators, which is the great god of the movement who tells us who's the best of all the charities, which it was super incestuous. A lot of the people who were leading other nonprofits worked with animal charity evaluator. Someone like Nick Cooney, who's been with the Humane League, and I think Farm Sanctuary, and various other ones probably. Lo and behold, his organization was granted the most effective, and he was like working with the organizations. It's like, but back in the day, they didn't even have trained scientists on board, and they were making the determinations who's most effective. This is strange. So when I wrote that, actually that was picking up on that when I wrote that first book, where you have animal charity evaluator, faunalytics, and they're not necessarily scientifically trained, and they're making these determinations on what evidence is and what's effective. And that was something I wanted to push back on. Yeah. I think nowadays we're starting to see a little bit more sophistication where they're getting more people on board who do have scientific training, but there's still a significant conflict of interest. When you have the organization itself creating research to find out, is my campaign that I've been dumping all this money into effective? Is this campaign that I'm going to use to appeal for grant funding effective? Yeah, they're going to say it is. They're not going to say, sorry, that we just used $1 million of your donations for this campaign and it didn't work at all. Or we've just used this grant that you've awarded us. Thank you very much. But it didn't do anything. They're not. No, so the science is actually being used, unfortunately, in a very corrupt way, I would say. I have a lot of problems with, this notion of effectiveness anyway, because a lot of these organizations are not even advocating for veganism.
Yeah. And one of the difficulties is there's one theme of this work, which is trying to justify the approaches that these organizations are taking. And in a way, it's good that they're being at least introspective and trying to look for evidence. But as you say, if that's not being done independently and scientifically, you can question how robust that thinking really is. But I guess there's also a theme that can sometimes run through the analysis of advocacy for non-human animals that also challenges the more direct abolitionist approach and says, look, advocating for abolition and veganism and a sort of purist stance might feel good and might help people like you and me feel righteous because we are right, so it's hard not to be righteous. But given the weight of social change, is that effective as well? So do you have a view? Your challenge, I think, is really clear about use evidence and rationality to think about what the best way forward is. But do you have a hypothesis about what is the most effective way we can drive change? Are you more in an open-minded position where you're saying, look, I'm challenging all of these other hypotheses because they don't have decent evidence. I'm not yet sure about the best way to take things forward.
This is a really exciting time, I think, to be a vegan sociologist or a vegan scientist of any kind, because this is right where we're finally science is starting to finally pay attention to this, because the animal rights movement has pushed culturally back on this. And now we're realizing that's one of the reasons I was hired at the University of Kent. They knew that vegan stuff's going to be hot.
Yeah.
So people who are listening who are not in the UK, and I'm an American, and I can definitely say coming from another country where veganism is popular, it's not anywhere near as popular as it is here. And so there's a lot of...
It's shifting, doesn't it? It does.
Yes. I was so shocked. I knew that when I moved here, it was January, and I knew that it was Veganuary that was going to be creating the swell. But having now lived here for 2 years, you walk down the street and vegan in the window, vegan on a sign on the street, just vegan. And it wasn't just Veganuary. It stuck around. It was around. And we're starting to see this kind of cultural resonance of veganism. And then, of course, science is, oh, wait, something interesting is going on. Maybe we should get on top of that. Yeah. So now we're starting to see actual institutional support for a research topic that before was not taken seriously, because against the odds, we have popularized veganism. And I say against the odds because the major animal charities have historically demonized veganism, have been afraid to promote veganism. For the most part, will only promote like vegetarian or plant-based or flexitarian, meat out Mondays, whatever it may be. And so now that veganism is becoming popular, in spite of that resistance, you're starting to see some of the nonprofits say, oh, this is cool now, so maybe we'll jump on board. But the point is now it's becoming culturally normative. And I can also say, as being vegan for 20 years, when I was earlier as a vegan, you couldn't get any of the options. People announce a vegan or whatever. Now it's normal. And in fact, like I said, I was hired to do what I do. I didn't have to hide behind social movement studies like I did in my last job. So I think that it's an exciting time because we're going to have more research and more evidence to support what is effective and what is not. And that is my life's mission. I'm 100% dedicated to that. And I'm glad to have that social movement training so that I can apply this in a way that's useful to the animals. We do have subfields or competing fields. In psychology, there's a lot of people who are doing effective animal advocacy. And a lot of them are my good colleagues. And in fact, at the University of Kent, we have something called Shark Lab, studies for the human-animal relations at Kent, which I'm a member of. And Christoph Dant runs it, and he's my buddy, and we will take over the world. However, sorry, Christoph, but I think that social change is not just about that individual kind of psychological response to what's going on. Unfortunately, in the animal rights movement, we kind of valorize psychology. Why? Because it is more individualized, because it's something that you can easily whip up for a grant application or put on your newsletter for your organization and say, oh, wow, this study shows that these pamphlets get more people to reduce this much meat versus that pamphlet. So this is like reductive, easy kind of science, right? Sorry, Christoph. There's actually a lot of very sophisticated.
I'm sure he won't be listening.
He will. There'll be a lot of very sophisticated statistics and stuff behind that, so I don't want to negate it. But what I'm getting at is it's not about just like this brochure gets people to give up this much more. Sociology can really bring a lot to the table for effective animal rights and thinking about what actually works. Yeah. Social movement studies has not really had its time to shine in the movement. It's all about philosophy and it's all about psychology. But what about sociologists? We're like the lonely ones out. I think we have a lot to offer. And you're asking about what is going to create social change. It's cultural, it's structural. So this cultural move where veganism is now popular, that is something we need to hold on to, celebrate, and keep on with, because that's what makes people go vegan and stay vegan. It has to be culturally normative. It has to be something that their friends and family are doing. The stigma needs to be reduced, because the main reason that people go vegan is because they care about other animals. The main reason people stay vegan is because of people who are supportive in their network.
Yes.
Now, the structural part also has to entail policy shifts. So I was mentioning earlier that Guardian podcast where the guy was talking about wanting to rewild parts of Scotland. And he was talking about how, it's a shocking statistic to me as an American, about 51% of UK land is used for grazing.
Yeah.
And he said,
it's incredible.
Yeah, he said most of that is for sheeps, and only about 1% of the UK calories come from sheep bodies. So he says the most resource ineffective thing that you can do. And then he says so illogical, it's so irrational, and it's so inefficient. Why are we doing this? The farmers. And then this gets into that kind of veganism isn't for everybody. It's going to put some people out. Yeah, it's going to put people out of farming animals. Surely it will. But this is where policy change can come in. So right now, the meat industry works at a deficit. It's not a profitable industry. It relies on taxpayer money. So if we if we challenge those subsidies and say, hey, what if we stop subsidizing these environmentally destructive, cruel, awfully unjust industries and start investing those subsidies into more sustainable plant-based foods, then we can see.
And in the compassionate transition for those farmers and the families and the communities that are currently invested in animal farming and helping them transition. Yes. Yeah.
I think that in Go Vegan World, Sandra Higgins in Ireland, because it's a similar situation, Ireland's like a whole nother game when it comes to this kind of topic, but she's, of course, comes up with her biggest protest, like counter protest, is the farmers. Farmers have a very nostalgic, powerful position in Ireland. It's colonial history, saved them through the famines and all that sort of stuff and helped them for independence. So it's really tricky when you challenge farmers in Ireland. And she says, look, I'm for farmers. And the farming situation in Ireland, like it is in many parts of the West, is grim because these farms are becoming bought up and industrialized, and the small farmers are getting squeezed out. A lot of them have serious mental health issues. They're impoverished. They're struggling to get by. She says, I don't want that for you. So what if the government actually supported you to move over to producing, say, flax seeds or oats or hemp, things that could be very useful for the economy, useful for foodstuffs, and not trashing the environment and killing animals?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a sociological response that you won't get from the glossy social psychology research. We're talking about big picture structural change. So we would need to really push back on subsidies, on where our tax money is going. There's an organization called the Vegan Justice League, and the person who runs that, one of the few voices we have in the movement that says, you know what, you can tell 100 people to go vegan, but the animal production will continue just the same because of subsidies. Yeah. So it's not a vote with your dollar simple situation. We have to shift the structure itself.
And I recognize your skepticism about some elements of the effective altruism movement as well. I think they're well founded. But at the same time, I think the effective altruist movement are also recognizing the balance you're talking about, because they're saying, if anything, if you look at the full field of animal advocacy, it is too heavily focused on the philosophical and the psychological and the individual change, and there isn't enough focus on that systemic policy, institutional level change. And it doesn't mean you just do one or the other. I mean, we need both, and even individual decisions can incrementally help. But the real power maybe is in that sociological space of policy and subsidy and regulation and law, and maybe that's where the big change is going to happen, particularly if we've got that backdrop of increasing cultural normalization and the removal of stigma around these things. Yeah.
Well, I think with the effective altruism, what irks me the most about it, and maybe there's bits of it that I'm not familiar with from what you just said, but coming from what I've seen with Peter Singer's campaigns, where it's if you have so much money, it's more effective to put it to these particular sources. And I remember I participated in one of his studies. He said, if you go to this website, I'll give you £1. You click where it should go. And then he was trying to figure out where it was going. I don't know what happened with the study, but it was stuff like mosquito nets in Africa or whatever.
Yeah.
So you must choose. But what it really irks me about the effective altruism kind of framework, and it's nonprofits love that, charities love that, because it's all about show your impact and show how effective you're going to use our money. It feeds right into the capitalist system. It's all about these wealthy Western white dudes who have all this money, who can make decisions on what happens with that money. Would they, if in the position, given the position or given the choice, would they say, okay, I'll give up all my power and all my money, and then everybody can have all these resources equally split? Some of them might.
That's not an option.
Yeah, Peter Singer might. What happens is it effectively supports this kind of charity relationship, which is deeply problematic, where the relationships aren't fundamentally challenged. It's about the poor out there who better be deserving, and if they're not deserving, they get nothing. And then the wealthy kind of philanthropers over here can feel great because I've donated some money to these poor people over yonder. But it's not challenging that system of inequality itself. It's also quite arrogant, I think, when you have a group of people who are quite wealthy who are making decisions about who's deserving and who's worthy and what is effective, which is always going to be through their lens and what counts as effective.
Yeah, I think they're fair challenges. And I think one of the things that I hope is healthy enough about the effective altruism movement is that certainly parts of it, I think, are mature enough to recognize those sorts of challenges and address them. So I think one interesting example is the Sentience Institute. I don't know if you've seen their work, but it's a very small group, but around Diana Fleischman and Jamie Harris, who just released an interview with him. But they're focusing on moral circle expansion and the most effective ways of making that happen. And they're one of the groups that's done both quantitative research into the scale of factory and animal farming, just to help us quantify how much suffering is going on. They've done some interesting survey work looking at things like how much of a latent support there is for banning factory farming, even amongst those who still consume animal products. But they've also done some foundational work on these sorts of topics about how much emphasis should we place on individual change versus societal or systemic change as well. And I do think that for most of the people I know in the effective altruism movement, they are at least to some degree aware of those types of challenges, and they are well motivated at a deep level. So I hope they'll build in the sorts of challenges you're laying out and self-correct and adapt. But we'll see how it develops, because some of the challenges you're laying out are certainly well-founded.
Yeah, well, when applying it to animals, I'm not that familiar with it. The Sentience Institute sounds familiar, but I haven't.
It's worth a look, because it might. I think I don't know. I'd be interested to get your view, but
I know that Faunalytics has done something similar to this, or Animal Charity Evaluator specifically, and I've looked at, and they abide by that, and they say, well, we're only going to focus on factory farming, and we're only going to focus on and they won't go with veganism, and it's all about the greater good. It's quite utilitarian in a way.
Yeah,
which is why Peter Singer's greatest good for the most people, and it's like, and again, I challenge that. Who are you to decide that focusing on making cages bigger is actually more effective than promoting veganism? At the end of the day, it's through particular people's lenses and they, of course, we can't negate the fact that these are glossy, fancy nonprofit charities that rely on funding, and they might say that this is more efficient, more effective, but what they're not saying, which is the discussion that's happening in the boardroom, is that we can't ever say that veganism is the most effective or efficient, because no one's going to want to fund us. We're not going to get that big check anymore.
Need to keep that oxygen flowing.
Yeah.
I've taken up loads of your time, but that's been a fascinating, wide-ranging conversation. When you think about the changes we've got in front of us, how does that leave you generally? Do you have space to be optimistic? Do you think there's a shift happening that will really make a difference for human and non-human animals that are oppressed? How quickly do you think we can capitalize on these shifts?
Quickly. Oh, geez. All right. The prediction question.
Sorry.
I don't know about that question, but I can say the biggest bit of encouragement I have experienced in my long career thus far of animal rights activism and being a vegan is moving here to England, and how much more normal veganism is. And like I said, it's imbrued in the streets and it's imbrued in the city culture here. It's like it's now becoming more accepted in academia to write about. For instance, I wrote to the American Journal of Sociology last week, and I asked them, would vegan sociology be a topic that you'd be interested in me writing an article about? Because I know that you've never published anything about animal rights or veganism or even animals in society. And one of the editors wrote back and says, it seems like it might be, make us a case. That's unheard of. So science is coming around, social sciences are coming around. Culturally, veganism is becoming so much more normal. The Guardian the other day had a podcast about veganism. I keep talking about podcasts, but it's coronavirus season, some podcasts. But I'm seeing like the BBC is covering like multiple vegan programs. Like vegan is becoming normal. And that's that classical tipping point theories. Once you have like a certain amount of normalcy and a certain amount of people doing it, then it's just all downhill from there. So I would, with the speed, the rate of change, I'd be very interested to see where I am by the time I retire. I would say that we would be in a much different world. And I think also something for listeners to consider is that meat and dairy consumption is stagnating in parts of the West, and in some cases decreasing. Like in the U.S., a lot of major dairy industries went bankrupt because no one is drinking their milk anymore. Sustainable plant-based milks are becoming more popular. So I think that there's certainly reason for us to be hopeful. And sadly, the thing is, a lot of this is just from cultural shifts. I don't know that these major nonprofits and charities are having that much to do with it.
Yeah, maybe. And I think the social change always feels painfully slow for the people in the middle of it trying to drive it. But as you look back over history, things can change really fast, right? In a historical context, it doesn't take that many decades for cultural norms and shifts and patterns of behavior and decisions and philosophies and ethics to radically change. So yeah, hopefully we're on the brink of seeing that happen here.
Yeah, I think coronavirus for me gave me a lot of hope. I said, this is it. Coronavirus is a complete symptom of what we do.
How many more reasons do you need? Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it did not prove to be that mobilizing moment that it could have been. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter was able to really send shockwaves through the world in the middle of a coronavirus when this should be our moment. It should be the animal rights moment. This is the time. Like the whole world has been just destroyed by this virus. Why aren't we talking more about veganism? So this is really, for me, a missed opportunity, but it's also, I think, very useful. Yeah, you're right, to think about how social change can, in fact, in some cases, happen very quickly. Maybe it's going to take another pandemic before.
Yeah, there will be more. There will be more. This conversation hopefully is a tiny contribution to that process of normalizing a naturalistic and sentiocentric way of thinking. So thank you so much for being part of it.
It's been what you do.
Yeah, it's been inspirational. Thank you. What's the best way of people following you and keeping up with your work and buying your books? And
you can check out my website at CoreyLeeWrenn.com. I also run a Facebook page. I run an Instagram page. It's mostly dog and cat pictures.
Yeah.
I have a newsletter. I would really suggest you subscribe to my newsletter because 4 times a year I do a digest of all the major things I've been up to, and I think that would be most useful for people. Yeah, you can also check out veganfeministnetwork.com or vegansociology.com. I'm a busy little bee. Got lots of good stuff.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't know how you do it. But I will include all of those links in the show notes, of course, as well. So, yeah. It's been an inspiration. Thank you so much, Corey. I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. And good to meet Mishka too.
Oh, look at her. Thanks, Jamie.
Take care.